The experience with group medical visits has been a real journey in a very positive direction that's really altered how we deliver primary care. And I think if you look at where we're headed in the future of primary care, some of the literature that I've read would suggest that perhaps individual office visits are going to be something that the system might not be able to afford, and they're a luxury. And for a lot of our patients, we've all been trained to provide the historical kind of care in a one-on-one kind of model. But times are changing, and patients are changing, patients' expectations are changing, and doctors historically are slow off the mark in change. So let's take a little journey, and I'm going to first tell you where I come from, so you put that into context. And Fraser Lake's basically in the geographical center of BC, and there's Vancouver and Whistler down below. And so we're in the heartland of BC. We're a blue-collar type of community, which I think a lot of you work in. We have a significant First Nations population. We have a mine, we have forestry, that kind of thing. We work in a health center that's a good 2 hours away from our referral center in Prince George. So we have 4 doctors, a nurse practitioner, acute care nurses. We have an emergency room and a clinic, and that's kind of our setup. And we've been on a journey of primary care reform for about 5 years, but really getting going in the last 2 to 3. And it all stemmed from taking a visit to the IHI meeting in Orlando in the early part of this decade and coming back with some ideas. So here's how we historically have taken care of patients. And this model continues to exist as the primary method of dealing with patients. And as you know, we work in an environment with an aging population, very complicated, complex patients, lots of demands on the system. And to deal with these effectively, it obviously takes a team to do this in an optimal way. I think when people think of group visits, especially doctors, they get uncomfortable. And I think that historically, people connect group visits with mental health, and perhaps everybody's sitting in a room talking about things, and they have a hard time extrapolating how a group visit could fit into primary care. But let me just play this little clip, because I think it's a good one. That's an example of, I think, what a lot of healthcare providers feel when they think about group visits, is getting into one of these predicaments that is a bit uncomfortable. What are you going to do? How are you going to navigate through it? And I've done this now. We've been doing group visits for 2.5 years, and I can assure you I've been in probably half a dozen audiences like this or more, and it's universally the same. A new idea like this, I mean, people just have a hard time with it, and you really have to change your paradigm of thinking in order to get over that. The biggest roadblock in instituting group visits are the healthcare providers themselves. That's it. End of the story. Okay. So I always encourage the audience to imagine just for a minute that you had done all your training in a group environment, and that all your patients had only seen healthcare providers in a group environment. All right? Say you were a patient in the group, and I came to you and I said, Linda, I really don't want you to come to the group today. I'd really like to see you all by yourself in my office. All right? You'd have that would be kind of freaky, and you'd have a bit of a hard time with that. So it would take time for you to be comfortable with the notion of going to see a healthcare provider all by themselves. So we work in an opposite system where we've been trained, and our patients have been trained to see people individually. And so it takes time to evolve into a confident and comfortable system, but my job is to convince you that it actually can be done so that you don't think you're a crank. So at this time, I think it's a good opportunity to, I'm just going to break away and show you a little video that we put together in BC through a thing called Impact BC, which is not unlike your QUIP, on group visits. So it's about a 5-minute video, and I think it explains kind of well 3 different types of group visits, and then we'll carry on with a discussion of how you do this stuff. So let's cut to the chase now. So what do we do in Fraser Lake? Well, every Wednesday morning is how I see patients in a group. That's it. So there's no discussion, and that's the way I started 2.5 years ago on Valentine's Day in 2007, and that's just how it's been since. And so, one of the questions that always comes up is, do you have a homogeneous group? I can kind of, if I'm in a diabetic group or a CKD group, I can wrap my brain around that. But I run a heterogeneous group. I run basically a drop-in group, which basically take all comers. So how does that work? Well, it works in the sense that patients come to know that my schedule has this particular morning on it. Just they know when the post office opens. They know when they can drop in for an appointment. They don't need a scheduled appointment. Some people book one, some people don't. And the reason why it can work so smoothly is because we have a team. Now, the team we had for this DVD, you can scratch the facilitator. I'm the facilitator as well as the MD. We used the facilitator early on in our groups, but because these are patients that I know, these are my cohort of primary care patients. I know them rather well, so we dismissed with the facilitator rather early in the game. Now, if you are running groups that people are strange to you on a regular basis, then a facilitator might be useful, because there are, in a group of, say, 10 to 15 patients, which is kind of the optimal number, one needs to know where the challenges are, who are the chatty ones, and who are the difficult ones. And I know them now because, of course, I've been there for over 10 years in Fraser Lake, so I kind of stick handle around them. But basically, there are 3 people in the group: myself, a nurse, and my clerical person. And you saw in the picture right here, we have a computer, and one of the things we've learned over time, this was an earlier picture, is that desk that you saw me sitting at the video, we actually put a laptop there as well, so that I no longer have to peer over the shoulder of the clerical person, and we keep fighting for the windows, different windows. I want to look here, and she wants to, that person is doing all the note-taking. So imagine you have 12 people in the group, which is kind of a very average number. We've had up to like 22, which is too many, but 12 to kind of 17 is optimal. And this is an individual group visit within the context of all these people. So you have to understand that important concept. This is not me going in to talk about something. This is about, I have no agenda when I go to these things, because it's just like going to the office in the morning. So I start with whatever patient I start with, and I ask them what their problem is and what brings them in, and away we go. And when I switch from patient to patient, it takes me a second to do so. Whereas in a traditional office, I have to leave the room, maybe fill out some paperwork, move to another room. And in our clinic, we only have one exam room each, so it takes about 5 minutes to turn over a room on average. So you can imagine 5 times 12 is an hour. So you can spend an hour of wasted time just doing nothing, right? Confidentiality has not been an issue, and it's like anything else. Once people become used to the group and comfortable with it, man, there is no topic that is taboo. I used to think that, there's my thinking getting in the way again, about what I think people might be comfortable with talking about. Erectile dysfunction, depression, alcoholism, subjects that you would think that are very personal, that there's no way someone's going to talk about that. You're wrong, okay? So, I don't come up with the topics. Patients, bring them up spontaneously within the context of the group. So that's been our journey and our surprise. I was like you when I started. I thought, there's no way they're going to talk about that stuff. Wrong. Okay? We measure patient satisfaction on a weekly basis. So these people leave. We collect data week after week after week after week. It's consistent. About 85 to 90% of the people love it and keep coming back. Just like anything, 10 to 15% of the world don't like it. So if you serve, filet mignon tonight, there's going to be 10% of people who are going to walk out the door, right? So you can't, that's just the way the world is. You're not going to have 100% uptake, but 90% is pretty darn good. In fact, I think if you measure it against our traditional model, the traditional model will have a tough time comparing itself to that. It's just that's been the only show in town for a long, long time, so patients haven't had an option. Now they have an option. So, and what we found as well, when you open the door to all comers, that the people who generally like the group visit in my practice the most are the chronic disease patients. So the more challenged you are, okay, I call them in our confidential medical lingo here, we call them train wrecks, right? So the more of a train wreck you are, my law is that there's a greater likelihood that you're going to like a group visit. And that makes sense because these people, if I start my group visit at 9:30, these people walk in the door about 9:15. They get into the room, we have a little table with some coffee, the clerical people are there, usually the nurses there. Their office visit has already started, right? They're already engaged in talking with other patients, with the clerical person, with the nurse. I don't show up till 9:30. And then I run it till it's done, and then I leave. But the other people hang around a bit longer. There's note-taking, there's different things. And so the people with chronic diseases aren't rushed here. They feel very comfortable, and they have a multitude of questions. And as we know, people with chronic diseases, there's huge crossover, and they all have the same problems. They all have weight issues. They all have smoking issues. They all have lipid issues and sugar issues and high blood pressure, and people have strokes and heart attacks and kidney disease. I mean, we have that board which you saw people writing on. That has been a real godsend that we found in our practice. So in our room, we have that big white dry erase board, and it's like a horse race. So if my wife runs a diabetic clinic for all the diabetics in the clinic, and we do it in my group as well to some extent, but it's more so when you have the diabetics. And you put up there A1Cs, GFRs, LDLs, HDLs, and the blood pressures and everything, and write all the names of the people. And all of a sudden, there's context to what your numbers are. So when you go to the doctor, if you're a diabetic and your doctor says, well, your LDL is 2.7, and your blood pressure is 150/70, and your GFR is 55, that means nothing to you as a patient. It means nothing. The doctor says, oh, that's pretty good, and let's maybe do this or do that, or But when you're in a group and you're a patient, and people start putting it's like if we all put our what mortgage rates we all had, right? All right. If everybody put all your names on the board, and then we'll all put down what mortgage rates we're getting, and all of a sudden, oh my God, I'm going to my bank tomorrow, right, and figure out what's going on. So people love seeing their numbers, and all of a sudden they go, well, how come my blood pressure, how come nine of those blood pressures are perfect, or what the doctor says they should be, but mine's not? Why is my cholesterol or A1C 9 and everyone else's is 6.8? And it's all of a sudden the light bulbs go on all over the place. So the board is extremely powerful, and people love it. So they get a bit competitive. The hardest critics of this model when we started are now advocates that you wouldn't believe. They're out there, basically pulling people off the street. Got to get in here, man. How come you're not coming to the group? And so they sell it. We don't have to sell it any longer because we've been doing it so long that it just runs on its own. So it's very, very effective. But let me get back to the point is that all these things come out by going around the room and addressing each person's problem individually. And over time, they become very educated and to make decisions, and they start to know when somebody's going to need to have their blood pressure medicine started or adjusted or what have you. Basically, when patients call in, we give them options, right? So, and I'll show you some slides if we have time about the journey of office redesign, and group visits are one facet of office redesign, which has been very useful in improving access. Not every patient is perfect for a group. Obviously, if you can't hear, if you have anxiety, agoraphobic, your English is a second language, those kinds of things, those are not people to put in the group. And we've had a few challenges along the way, because receptionists our receptionist inappropriately put somebody in, and we worked around it, and it's been okay. It's very, very rare. But patients are offered appointments. So you can see Dr. John in his regular office, or you can come to the group tomorrow. What would you like? I've never put a restriction on the numbers of patients who show up for the group. So if I have 22 patients show up, I deal with all 22. It's not optimal, but I don't want to have a closed door policy. But what we found in my practice, again, when you open it up like that, all those chronic disease patients tend to want to come to the group. I get a few WCBs, I get a few people who need notes, I get a few people who need a prescription renewal sprinkled in. So if I have a group of 15, at least 10 of those people are going to be chronic disease patients, and the other 5 are going to be kind of other things. Some people might have blown their knee out on the weekend, somebody's got a sore back or a sore shoulder, prescription, whatever. And we'll usually deal with those problems first, and we always give the offer to everyone. You can stay as long as you want, or you can leave. And most people stay for the whole thing, but they're more than welcome to leave. And so a few people just need to come and go, and they're out the door. Number one, everyone gets the confidentiality part drilled into them by the nurse, which has not been an issue in almost 2.5 years. And then people can come and go as they choose. Again, I'm pretty good now because I know my patients, and we have them. In every group I have, there's at least one who's the chatterbox and who dominates the discussion. And I usually start away from them. I usually make them the last person that I talk to. And they're okay with that. When you learn about groups, facilitators are the ones who help steer around these people who are dominating the discussion. Because you're right, you can't. If you've got 12 people in the room, basically everyone's got about 5 minutes, 6 minutes of time, which is loads. Because as a doctor, I'm just sitting here talking to you, making eye contact, and we're talking about your problem. I'm not busy looking up things. I'm not filling out paperwork, because all the people behind me are doing that. If somebody if you need a prescription, by the way, I need my blood pressure pills, and I have a sore shoulder. As I'm dealing with your sore shoulder, the prescription's already being coming out the printer by the girls, and they put it in front of me, and I sign it, and carry on, right? So that's how I deal with patients who dominate discussions. I steer around them, get to know them. If you're doing this in your own practice, you will know. You'll get to know who your patients are. If you're working in it with a group, people you don't know, if you're working in a community health center, you're doing a diabetic group with 12 brand new people, then you're gonna need to make arrangements, and that's where I would suggest a facilitator would be very helpful. All right. Chronic disease patients, in general, certainly in my practice, generally come to the clinic, 3, 4, 5 times a year, if not more. I mean, I have some class 3, 4 heart failure patients who I get to come to my group every single week, because I firmly believe I keep them out of the hospital by having them come every week. It doesn't make any difference to me. They come to the group, my nurse weighs them, we listen to their lungs, we play with their Lasix, we do things that keep them out of the hospitals. Part of office redesign, we have a chronic disease nurse in our office, and this is work that's going on behind the scenes on a continual basis. So people are getting letters, people are getting follow-up, whatever, notes from her. She makes sure I don't have to do it. This is so easy for me, because I come to the room and this chronic disease team they're all over this stuff. They manage this cohort of patients on a week-by-week basis, so that people show up with all sorts of stuff. We're not, all their blood work done, and then when they come to the group, if they haven't been there a long time, she quickly, pulls up their chronic disease template. She knows when what they haven't had, and fills out the recs, and it's all good to go. So that's all being done by my staff, and I don't even have to pay attention to it for the most part. We have an adjacent exam room to the group room, and you need to do that. To be successful. There are a few things you need that you must have. One is a team, 2 is an EMR, if you want to do this well. And you need to have a whiteboard, you need to have a couple of computers probably, and you need to have an adjacent exam room. It doesn't need to be an elaborate one. For the longest time we've had just an ad hoc kind of thing where we brought down a gurney and some dividers, and you make one, right? A makeshift one. And it works fine. And now we've kind of structured in a more formal one. So if somebody has a rash or a shoulder, I'll often examine them in front of the group with their permission. And everyone's more than interested in this stuff. You'd be amazed, because who hasn't had a sore back? Who hasn't had a sore shoulder? Who hasn't had a rash? I mean, everyone, it's part of the human condition, right? We all have these problems, so everyone's interested when someone else presents with one of these problems. If a lady has a lump on her breast, if you need to listen to lungs, then a lot of times I'll have a medical resident with me or a student, and I'll get them to take the patient out to the exam room. They'll examine them, they'll come back and report back to me what they find. I'll often re-examine them. But we do the examinations that need to be done in private in that room. The difference is when you're in your office, okay, if I'm in the office in the historical way, that one-on-one model, if the phone rings, if I get a knock on the door or a phone call, say there's another doctor on the line, and I leave, the visit comes to a grinding halt, okay? And it doesn't start again until I come back. So in a group, though, that's not the case. So the group keeps carrying on. The nurse can do a lot of things, most of the things that I can do, especially if they're, for a lot of these things. I just came to get my test results. I just came to get this, or she can give them all that. And then when I come back, I review it all too. So your team members will carry the group going as you, but you don't want to keep stacking them up so that at the end of the group you've got 6 people to examine. That's not going to work well. Do you guys do a lot of teaching? Do you have residents and nurse practitioner students and medical students? And is that a common thing here? We get a lot of them, and we utilize them. We use they're very helpful in managing patients. You need to look at data if you're going to do anything with office redesign. And there were some excellent talks this morning on office redesign. Group visits are one arrow in your quiver of how you're going to knock down primary care reform, okay? How you're going to improve access, how you're going to improve quality, how you're going to get to those benchmarks of chronic disease, things that you want to do. Group visits are one facet of success. But what we can show is that when we did all this stuff in Fraser Lake, and we looked at our numbers in 07 and 08, you can see that in the office we had an increase in in encounters. So by making your system more efficient, by group visits, for example, on Wednesday morning, I can see about 20, 22 patients, whereas historically I saw 10 to 12 in the same morning, okay? So if you spread that across all healthcare providers in your office, that's huge. That's just Wednesday morning, okay? So if you make little changes, they may not seem big by looking at them in their own, but when you actually stand back and look at them, they have tremendous power. It's like 0.5% on on your mortgage has a tremendous impact on things. So our our encounters went up in the office because that's what we wanted it to do, and our ER visits went down, right? Very powerful for the health authority when it came to funding. Say, hey, look at us, look what we've done. And I also showed in 10 years since we've been there that our admissions to the hospital, the neighboring hospital, went down 15%. Okay. This just shows data that I give it to our clinicians and our NP, and it just shows them how they're doing. This is 07 versus 08, and it just shows their encounters that they're having. And when I say encounters, I mean the world is changing, and an encounter in my mind now is not just an office visit. It has to do with telephone calls, e-visits, whatever modality one is going to use to deliver care. All right, we live in an economy that's sagging tremendously. People can't afford to take the afternoon off work to come get a prescription. I mean, that's just outrageous. And so we have to use different methods of care to meet the demands of this new century. And e-visits are there. I think you've heard a little bit, or you're going to hear about that. Group visits, traditional one-on-one visits, phone calls. I was just at the IHI meeting. Big clinics in Colorado, in California. They just schedule them in. They have an hour of either at the end of the morning or end of the day, and 5 or 10 minute appointments for phone calls. And when you phone in, you get an option. Do you want to see the doctor in the flesh? Do you want to e-visit? Do you want a phone call? It's just the way it is. That's the future, and so that's what we do. So these are encounters. They take into that because it impacts on my world to do a lot of phone call consultation stuff. This is just numbers showing you our group visits are moving up with popularity, and not unexpected, but it is good to know. I mean, I could tell you that, but it's important for you to see that so that, you know, people aren't, oh, this is a dog and it's dying a natural death. It's quite the contrary. It continues to pick up momentum. Originally, we had this poster, well, we still have it in the office, but we had little pamphlets as well that it's a bit like when you start out in practice and you have no patients and you're working in the merge and you're working in your office and you're working in all these different places and you're handing out cards saying, why don't you come back and see me, come back and see me, and come back and see me. So I would invite patients to be brave and to come to this new kind of care. And the Health Authority put this together, and the pamphlet, and we can get you all the stuff, so you don't the people here know my email address, and our Health Authority are more than happy to send all this kind of stuff out. You don't need to reinvent the wheel here. So, but it's helpful because I don't have time to explain the whole thing. In broad strokes, I explain it, I give it to them, and I say, you know, I see someone emerge, for example, with pneumonia, and I know they need to be reviewed in a week. I say, do you mind coming to my group next week, and I'll just quickly check your chest, make sure everything's okay. No problem, and those are follow-up visits can be really great in a group as well, because they just tie up spots. I think you need to get very secure with yourself and your team, and you evolve and move forward. You know, the most adamant naysayers I've had success with in the neighboring community, okay? I work on an alternate payment plan. My friend, this concept was devised in a fee-for-service setting in the United States, okay? So it wasn't even meant for my payment method, although it works beautifully well in an alternate payment setting. But my colleagues down the road, they're in a fee-for-service world. I went to talk to them about this about 2 years ago, and they, I may as well have been trying to explain to them that the earth was round, right? It was not, the world was still square in their mind, and this wasn't gonna happen. Well, we kept just persisting, and good work rewards itself, as you know. So the data speaks for itself. We kept presenting the information, and now I got them, one of the guys does colonoscopies. I said, he had a huge wait list, because you've seen colonoscopy, somebody comes in, right? You're getting referrals from all the neighboring communities for colonoscopies, saying the same thing over and over. Like, don't you ever get tired of that? Why don't you just bring them in all together and tell them the same story and go over everything, have the nurse watch a video, whatever, and in an hour you can wipe out 20 people or whatever you want to do. It's so easy, something like that. So that's what he did, and within about a month, he had no wait list. All right? So, and he's a believer now. They built a group room, and all these doctors who thought that this was a bunch of bunk are now starting to use it in prenatals and things that they're comfortable with, which is good. And that's what you need to do. You need to get your footing, feel secure about whatever group of patients that you think that you could do. That's what you should start with. And then, like anything else, you don't know where it's going to take you. You'll get more comfortable with things, and you'll evolve. We made the mistake early on. The whole idea is it's a drop-in medical appointment. So it's like people don't make an appointment to go to the liquor store, right? They just drop in at 10:30 when the doors open. So this is no different, and people know, they just drop in. And one morning the girls came to me, oh, we only have 2 people booked. And I said, oh, well, I'll just see those 2 people in my office then. Just tell them to go to the waiting room. Well, at 25 after 9, like 10 people walked in, right? So so we never made that mistake again. And yes, the majority I usually have 5 or less booked out of, say, 15. And people just show up. And the beautiful thing about an EMR, of course, people show up. It's, our person just goes click, 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 and there's their chart and adds them to my day list. Whereas if you were in a paper world, man, you're gonna need to hire, a donkey and a kid to run back and forth getting charts. It won't work efficiently. So that's where an EMR is a real must. Okay. This is just some early data that we had just to show people. There are dates there, February, March, April, May, and then underneath those are the numbers of people. So we had 14, 11, 13, 16, 12. I just wanted to show you there's consistency. And then this is a common thing that happens when you start a group. There's great buy-in for that first month or 2, or 3, and then down it goes, okay? The numbers start to drop, and the numbers drop because you don't have enough of your population in that mentality of a group. And that's where everyone has to just hang on, because the majority of teams bail at that point. So if you're a doc and you go and you're doing a diabetic group and you have, and for some things the numbers will be different. My wife likes about 8 to 10 diabetics because she just feels more comfortable with that number. And she, you have 10, and then 6, and then 4, and then 2, in successive weeks. And at that point, the doc says, screw this, we're out, this is not working. Nobody likes it. And that's the wrong thing to do. And if you listen to the people who, Dr. Knopfsinger, who's the kind of pioneer of group medical visits, he talks about that. You run out of, especially in a rural area, or when your populations aren't super big, you can exhaust that population, or you don't have enough people who know about the group, and your numbers will shrink, and then people bail, and then that's the end of the group. And that's the wrong thing to do. As I said, you need to hang on, and then they start to build again. And now, I would say it's probably about the next 3 months, or the months that are kind of, and then it builds again, and then it stays like that forever. We've had no decline. I mean, unless it's 50 below and a raging snowstorm, people just can't get to the clinic. That's, we might have a decrease, but you need to hang on. So that's a natural kind of curve for the group in terms of attendance, and you need to just be aware that it's normal to have a little blip on the screen. These are just to show you some of the groups that we're doing. So my wife does diabetic group medical appointments, and she's also started a women's Aboriginal clinic, which is a huge success. So we had we have an Aboriginal team that goes out to the reserves, and in our Aboriginal people, in their culture, group kind of medicine is the way they've done it forever. And in fact, the way we classically do it is not the way they traditionally got their care. And what we do is we close the health center down to all men. It's women only. And you got to remember, these are very disadvantaged people. Their lives have been, complete with abuse like you can't believe. And they stop talking if there is a man in the room, in the building. So this is a women's only clinic. She did 12 complete physicals in an hour and a half for women. And that's pretty tough to do. She can't do that in her office, not even close. And they did it in a true group. So what happens is that they have a room that she was leading the group in the room and asking all their questions as they had them. And one at a time, the nurse practitioner and another nurse took them into the exam room and did their pap and breast exam. And one at a time, boom, 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 went around the table, and the group, and she kept answering their questions. The feedback from that was just unbelievable. And talking from an efficiency standpoint, these are people who never, might have never had a pap smear or breast exam, that kind of thing. So we're quite excited about that in an Aboriginal setting, and in underserviced and disadvantaged groups of people. I think it has great potential. They really like it. And then my partner at the bottom started to do COPD asthma clinics, and he's probably our greatest naysayer. He's been the lowest on the uptake, but this is an area that he feels comfortable with, and I think it's important to acknowledge that. And I don't push people further than what they think they feel comfortable with. He likes to do COPD asthma. We do pulmonary function tests in this kind of way, and it's become a chronic disease that's now part of the provincial mandate for chronic disease management, and there are flow sheets and all this kind of stuff. So it's something that we need to do better with, and that's one way. So here's our scorecard through our EMR. So you can look at the hemoglobin and A1C in the last 6 months. We're a little over 70% for our diabetics in the clinic. And I looked around. There were a lot of good results out in the on the boards there. And this is a scorecard that I give all the clinicians. We give them this one, which is aggregate data, and I give them individual ones so they can see their own patients, because everyone has their own panel of patients, right? For the most part, there's crossover, but it's good to know how you're doing as well. And hemoglobin A1C in the last year, less than 7. We're about 55, 56% kind of thing. The fact that people are just measuring it is an amazing step. All right. Once you measure it and look at it, then you can actually critically decide what kind of improvements can we make to do better. So we found, for example, our diabetics, the eye check rate, especially in a rural area, what do you think it's like? Poor, right? Way down there, probably less than 10%. So what do we do? Last week I brought in an ophthalmologist from Vancouver, and he worked 5 days. He saw, I don't know how many patients, screened. The chronic disease nurse, brought in all the diabetics. We sent out letters for people who had not had an eye exam within the last year. Man, I can guarantee you, when we look at our rate here in 2 months, there's going to be a like that. We had echocardiograms. I was a big advocate to bring in echo service into our area. If you look at our heart failure patients, we don't meet the benchmark levels for echocardiograms for our heart failure patients. We can't do it because the service is so poor in the northern half of BC. Even in the southern part, it's horrid. There are a low number of techs, that kind of thing. So what do we do? I was able to create a pilot project funding and show that if we brought a tech in from Calgary, flew them in, and he does 24 echoes in a day, this guy. And all of a sudden, boom, our people with echoes who have heart failure, it's up to like 80% now. And it's cost effective, it's for the health authority, and it's worked well. So the point is that if you don't measure it and don't look at your numbers, you have no way of knowing what's working and what's not working. And we've looked at some of our screening stuff with PAPs and breast exams, and it's not optimal. And if you ask doctors, what do you think? What do you think your PAP rate is like on your eligible women? Oh, it's good. It's excellent. It's really good. What do you think your blood pressure control rate's like? Oh, it's really good. I think it's it's very reasonable. Wrong. You don't know. You don't know. Having a feeling about what it is, how well you're doing, is often wrong. Unless you look at the numbers, unless you measure it and look at the numbers, you don't know. It's been shown time after time after time that clinicians do not know what their wait times are. They don't know, and they don't know how well they're doing with a lot of these chronic disease initiatives. Do you think that's true? Do people agree with that? Yeah. This is just patient satisfaction data that I told you about, and it just supports that. It's about 85 to 90% high uptake on the group medical appointments. This just shows you that when we started this whole primary care reform thing, and my wait times, on average in our clinic was about 17 days to the third next available appointment, which is pretty standard. If you look across the most primary care doctors, it's 2 to 3 weeks, somewhere in that kind of range. And it settles out, right? So if a doctor practices a certain way, generally has a static population, more or less, and you get into a rhythm of seeing so many patients, it's a supply and demand problem. It's not that technical, and your wait time will just evolve and stay there forever. So unless you do something with it. And so this is where mine went when I started making some changes about how I deliver care, group visits being one of them. But it really, really helped. It really cleaned out, it unclogged the rest of my week for other things and to clean up those things. And this is, because if you think I'm feeding you full of untruths, this is just data from the Cleveland Clinic, which again is consistent with our numbers. And this is more data from there as well, showing people in plastic surgery practice who liked a group appointment versus an individual visit. And again, it was high uptake. So it takes time to do this stuff, and it can seem overwhelming, but actually it's not. And the trick, like most things in life, is just to jump in. You gotta have a few things in order. You gotta have a few tools, but then you just gotta go. And it's not gonna be perfect. It might not be pretty the first little while, but you'll get it. And there's so many supports now for you, which are going to be helpful. And and it might not be for everybody, and that's okay too. This isn't meant to be a universal thing. It's meant for for people who think that they might want to try something different. I can tell you, in terms of job satisfaction, I love doing something different on Wednesday mornings. I look forward to the day, right? I kind of, you get tired of seeing patients one after the other in that old way. At least I do anyway. And I know I have to do that part of my job, but I've tried to chop up my weeks so that it's not consistently like that, and I have things like this. So the gentleman in the back said, well, why don't you do more of them? And I would love to do more of them, and I hope to do more of them. And I'm looking for new opportunities to do more of them, because I think that's how useful they are in the right environment with the right people. So that's our white moose, who we're famous for in Fraser Lake. And he's not an albino moose because you can see little bits of black on him. But it's the carrier people where I come from consider him to be a very important spiritual animal and has great significance in their culture. So quite rare that you see him. There are a handful of them on the North Shore of Fraser Lake, and it's very special when it's like a Kermode bear. You've heard about a Kermode bear out on the West Coast terrace. It's a white black bear, and they're kind of rare and they have neat meanings. So try the group visits, learn about them, and I think you'll be all pleasantly surprised. And you guys are all doing an amazing job with a lot of chronic disease. And I think, if nothing else, for chronic disease management, group visits are the best fit I've ever seen. There's just nothing that can challenge them. If I just had a population of chronic disease patients, it's a no contest, okay? Trying to do it all by yourself in that traditional way versus a team and doing it in a group setting, it's the way to go. And we're going to have the next 2-3 decades are going to be full of chronic disease patients. You've seen the numbers for diabetes, heart failure, atrial fibrillation, right? Everyone's seen them. So how do you think that in our classical way of managing patients that we're possibly going to take care of those patients? There's no way, in my opinion. So I think that as we build capacity, part of that capacity is our seeing people in this kind of venue and forum. Thank you very much.